Hey, everybody. Welcome to Power Up Church. It is 2026. It's nice to see everybody here. Sorry, I am just getting over a cold, so if I, sound like I'm hacking up a lung or just clearing my throat constantly, you know why. But I want to start off this year something different. Um, there's been with this whole revival thing going on for Christians and stuff like that, we need to understand that there are in the roots of everything why there was a decline back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Why there was a decline in church. In fact, for a long time, there was a huge decline in church attendance. And it's not just based on just one factor. It's like people just got tired of going to church. No, there's other factors involved that you'll see here in what we have here. And I have to admit, Simon Whistler for Into the Shadows, he has many other channels, mega projects. Today I found out he used to do a top 10s, but in this one thing that we're going to be watching, the weird way megachurches actually work, you're going to see a lot of churches mentioned. You're going to get my perspective on them. I do have very strong feelings about mega churches in many aspects. There's going to be a critique on very famous pastors. I do have my personal opinions on them, but you're going to get it both, not just my personal opinion, but also the perspective of a pastor, and also in many aspects what I feel church should be. And you're going to get a lot more nuance. Excuse me. A few more nuanced aspects. I'm also going to go and give you basically a peek behind the scenes, give you about as full transparency as I can give you, because he's going to go into things that if you don't understand a little of the background, you're not really getting the whole picture. And because from Mr. Whistler's point of view, he's seeing from the outside in, where I'm going to show you the inside, show you the inside from within, if that makes sense in any aspect. But I respect this one critique on megachurches because it really is a good look at, why is it that now we're having a revival? What happened before? And something that churches can do in the end. So we're going to watch the video. I'm every so often going to, like every time, like everybody else who commentates and all that, I'm going to give them, stop and give you a little bit more perspective and a little more background so that you understand that you can't have it. You can't just listen to one side and say, oh, that's all of it. But at the same time, I'm not going to make excuses for very bad behavior. And we're going to also see some of that in many of his examples. And I will tell you this, yeah, there are many many bad examples out there, unfortunately, in the these days. And it's and the parishioners who go to these churches, who watch these pastors, I don't blame them. Some of them I would just say, hey, you're just barking up the wrong tree. And for others, it's going to be like, okay, if you see this in your church, maybe that's not a good thing. So without further ado, let's get into it.
There's a certain allure in the grandeur of power, especially when it's cloaked in faith, promising salvation, and illuminated under the bright lights of a stage. Every Sunday, tens of thousands of people stream into massive buildings around the world, structures so large they could be mistaken for arenas. The music swells, the lights dim, and a lone figure steps out onto the stage.
So in this intro, he gives, a really good critique of what mega church, and he's going to give you the definition of what mega churches really are. But I will tell you this, in today's modern age, you're going to see a lot of churches go into that, bright lights, big city, Broadway production, because with the advent of smartphones, with the advent of instant information, we're getting instant gratification. You guys want to be entertained. Now, for me, I'm not going to entertain you. I'm going to give you a message. I'm going to give it to you straight. I'm going to give it to you solid. But we also will go play games because, hey, it's a great way to interact. You guys can, all you crewmates here can actually interact with myself and Asai, so that you can get information both ways. And I like how I paused there. But he's right. These, tens of thousands of people go into these megachurch structures that can host thousands of people at one time. That's why you see many churches have 2, 3, even 4 service times, is because it's great that they're growing and they can add those. But at the same time, what's behind it and what's the philosophy behind it? It's going to be a little off in many aspects. And the reason why I say that is because the church has now come to the ideal that you need to entertain to, I'm going to say it roughly, put butts in seats. And unfortunately, that comes out of the era of instant gratification. But let's continue.
The crowd hangs on every word, their emotions stirred by powerful promises of hope, of redemption, of miracles. But a much darker reality lies behind that soaring music, massive crowds, and impassioned sermons. These aren't just places.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to be talking about some of these people that you're going to be seeing in many of these news clips.
Worship, they are empires. Megachurches operating on a scale so vast that the lines between faith and business blur. In these institutions, salvation is promised, but it comes with a hefty price.
Okay. Here's the problem. And this is where I'm going to critique Simon on this one. Salvation is promised when you follow Jesus. That's just what it is. That's the problem. The problem is what he's putting is salvation is like prosperity. And in many of the aspects, and the people we're going to be meeting that he's going to critique, and I will definitely critique with him and not against Simon, is there used to be a period where prosperity gospel was the thing. Joyce Myers was one who really did. Now she's not really doing it, but the idea is, okay, if you give money or if you pray hard, then God will reward you. And that's where I have a problem with many of these mega churches, is they produce that. And if you saw previously, the vitamins and all that, that's just I'm going to call it BS, because what does vitamins have to do with salvation? What does vitamins have to do with Jesus? What does vitamins have to do, nutritional supplements? What does that have to do with Christ, God, and faith? And if you said nothing, you're absolutely right. But let's continue.
Price. The pastors are not just spiritual leaders, they are CEOs. And the church, it's a finely tuned machine designed to generate millions. Roughly speaking, a megachurch is any Protestant Christian congregation that attracts on average of 2,000 or more people to its weekly services. According to recent reports, the United States is home to over 1,750 of them, with the largest boasting weekly attendance numbers in the tens of thousands, both in person and online. The Lakewood Church in Houston holds a colossal 16,800 people. However,
if you go back, let's see if I can scroll this back. If you notice, it's a big, huge stage. It's a big, huge arena right here. And yet it's not even full. I'm not saying that as, it's a bad thing, because out here in Arizona, we do have places where, during summer, it's just dead. There's no, there's just not a lot of people. And it's only because it's 100 degrees outside. What crazy person goes out in 100-degree weather? Arizonans. Okay, I'll give you that one. But if you notice, yes, I mean, Lakewood Church, 6,800 people. If a single church gets that many people in one go, that's a miracle. However, we're going to see more.
800 people.
However,
the biggest megachurch in the world, by membership at least, is Yoido Full Gospel Church in South Korea, with 800,000 members and a physical capacity of 12,000. But size alone doesn't capture what sets these institutions apart. It's not just the number of worshippers, it's how they function. So let's go back to Lakewood Church. Led by Joel Osteen, one of the most recognizable televangelists in the world, Lakewood draws in about 45,000 attendees every week and has a reported $90 million annual budget. Its influence, however, stretches far beyond its walls. Osteen's sermons are broadcast globally in his books.
So, yeah, Joel Osteen is not somebody that I really admire or anything like that because, and you'll see later on why I really don't, but the problem is that here is what he's saying. It's like, oh, it's all over the world. You know, they do the. We've been doing that for some time, not as much as YouTube has been around or anything like that, but you're watching me live here streaming, so that's nothing new. Remember, church is just coming from the TV where we had the Power Hour with Robert Schuller. If you lived in California, you know about that. But there's many churches that did live service on TV, radio, when that came out. So that's nothing new. What's new is the business side of it, and I'm going to say this right now. There is a business side and there is the church side, because in this day and age, churches do require money to operate. I mean, they're, to pay for equipment, people aren't donating anymore. And the idea, and going back to what I said earlier, is we got to, impress, we got to entertain. Usually for a lot of pastors and a lot of churches, it means the latest, greatest equipment, the latest and greatest technology. And that's all well and good, but it used to be back in the day, way back in the day, people would donate to the church and the church would use that to spread the gospel. People don't do that anymore. Granted, we have the passing of the plate or the tithes or online donations, and down below, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna wax poetic, but down below you see the support of the Fleet Support Network. We ask for donations with that thing, with that link, so we're not against it. The difference is where does the money go, and we're going to get to that much later, but let's continue.
CDs and podcasts are consumed by millions, making him a household name. His personal net worth is estimated $100 million, and he lives in a lavish $10.5 million mansion.
I'm going to say this right now, and I know I stopped, in this, but him and many others that did prosperity gospel, they're worth millions. Me, I'm not worth that much. Any good church has a pastor that may have a net worth of $500,000, and that's because of retirement plans and stuff like that. But net worth, I need to tell you, is not income. It's assets over liabilities. I will tell you this right now, and this is a spoiler alert for much later as well, and I'm going to repeat it as well. His mansion is probably paid for by the church in full. He may have a mortgage on it. That mortgage is probably paid in full because myself and other pastors can get what is known as a housing allowance. And that's a separate thing. It's not taxed or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, we can get that. And if you see, your pastor's living in a beautiful mansion, that's worth millions of dollars, I'm going to say it right here. I wouldn't trust them, because now it's all about the lavish lifestyle instead of talking to the flock. My opinion, you can agree, you can't, doesn't matter, but that's where I sit, so let's continue.
Not bad for a man of God, but I do wonder how Jesus would have felt about that. And then there's Hillsong Church, which started in Australia and has grown into a global network of megachurches with campuses in over 30 countries. Every weekend, Hillsong attracts hundreds of thousands of attendees. It's not just known for its services. Hillsong is also famous for its music, with albums that have topped charts worldwide. What
and they're
truly sets
very
megachurches
vicious
apart isn't
about
just
their
their
licensing.
size, it's how they operate. These churches function like corporations, employing full-time staff, including marketing departments, financial advisors, and media teams. Their pastors are more akin to CEOs than traditional spiritual guides, managing multi-million-dollar budgets and overseeing operations that span continents.
Okay, so on something like that, it's only because I'll tell you right now, it's the scale of the whole thing. I, as Pastor Brandon of Power Up Church, I use the title Fleet Commander just because that's our motif for the church. But yeah, even if I received a donation of, say, $20 million, let's just say, that has to go out and fund missions. It has to fund our our operations and stuff like that, and we'll get into that. And I'll talk about how we look at it versus, and what Simon's going to get into is how churches operate. And I'm going to give you actually a breakdown. And I unfortunately had a slide for you that broke it down into percentages, but you can look it up. I'll even give you where I got my information. But we're going to talk about how that works. But yeah, when you're talking on a global scale where you have millions at funds at your disposal that you have to, as a nonprofit, liquidate is the best way I could say it. You have to use all the money. The problem is how that money is distributed, and this is where churches sometimes don't go full transparency. You'll see that in many aspects, but yeah, we have to operate as a business because that's how the world operates. Many high profile donators, and high net worth donators who donate millions of dollars at a time, they want the same thing as a standard for-profit startup. They want to know what's your plans. They want to know what your budget is. They want the same thing that, let's say, Tesla in the beginning, when it was just starting out, when it was looking for investors. We have to treat those donors as investors as well. It's a sad reality, but it's the unfortunate reality that we live in. Would I like it different? Yeah, definitely I would like it. But unfortunately, that's a sad reality. It's not an excuse. It's just the way things are. But, and this is the big but, it's how the funds are managed. Do they go mostly to the church and its internal operations? Or is it really going to what the church's statement is, to spread the gospel? And we'll get into that later.
These churches are experts at generating revenue, and donations are just the start. Megachurches sell a lifestyle that comes with a range of merchandise, but also encourages members to give 10% of their income, promoting the prosperity gospel, which links financial generosity to divine blessings.
And what he's talking about is the prosperity gospel, where, hey, you donate this amount of money to the church. And I've seen this prosperity gospel, and let me break it down for you. It was preached way back, like The Secret, if you know what that video is. Basically, you donate to the church, and God will return your donation plus a little extra so you can donate again. That's the prosperity gospel. And what people like is, hey, I like hearing that, hey, more money coming to me to be able to, not only if I donate, hey, God's going to get me more money. The sad reality is, and this is why a lot of churches now are turning away from it, is because that really was the wrong thing to do. And we're going to get into several groups that really did it. And I'm going to say it right now. The group that I belong to leaned heavily in this during the 2000s and 2010 era. Because I sat in a church seat listening to it. And I'll tell you this, it sounds great, but that's not really what the Bible says. So
you can probably see where the slippery slope is headed. The draw to these churches is undeniable. It's designed to make attendees feel part of something larger than themselves, but once you're in, the emotional connection deepens. Megachurches cultivate devoted followers who view the church and its leaders as the ultimate source of guidance. The line between spiritual leadership and control can become dangerously thin.
And we've seen this in the past. A Reverend Moon and oh man, it's where we get the Kool-Aid, and I cannot remember his name right now. I'll remember it later, of course. But you know who I'm talking about. Kool-Aid guy. That really is cult following, and for many, this is why people have left the church, because there's this cult mentality. And I have to admit, there still is that mentality in a lot of churches. You get people who are so fervent within their church that, oh, the pastor can't do wrong. I will tell you this. Me, I'm a human being. I will screw up. I sin. Do not ever put me on a pedestal. Even if Power Up Church becomes this mega church, do not put me on a pedestal. I am just as fallible as the person sitting in the pew. I may be on stage, but I am not the great savior. I don't know everything. I don't know what God's plans are for you 100%, because like you're an individual. God has individual plans for you. I can give you, say, the general plan is salvation, repent, and how you get it. You follow Jesus. That's the basics. But I'm going to go into depth with scripture and stuff like that so that you get an understanding where you're, you may say, oh, I don't know what God's plan is. You hear a sermon about, say, volunteering. It's like, you know what? I feel this draw to volunteer. Those are the type of things that I try to do. I'm not going to give you, if you do this, God's going to do this, and it's going to be instantaneous. It doesn't work that way. God has his own time frame. And even for me, I've been doing this for quite a while. Even God's plan is I don't get a church building. God's plan is probably, I probably will, but it's not his, time for me to do it, because probably I have to learn something. Something has to click up into here to get people to understand that, hey, we need a church building so we can get people in church, talk to them, plus build the community around it. And for me, community is the big thing. But in many of these mega churches that I have seen, when they stopped looking at community and looked at the money won out every time. And therein lies the problem. This is why I'm going into this, is because I want you to get a more understanding and more feeling. Because if you've never seen this before, and I've watched it constantly, it's one of those sobering things of what not to do and what to do than anything else. And it just is, if I get this idea, I'm going, I'll pray about it, don't get me wrong, but then I'm like, okay, am I hitting a point where Simon is pointing out that maybe this is not a great idea?
Okay, so let's talk about the figureheads of these megachurches, the pastors. These are almost exclusively men, with one report stating that of the 500 biggest megachurches in the US, only 2 were led by women. I know, shock horror that these places.
Okay, I can get into this for a whole decade, but women are to take care of female ministry because female, but and this is a debate that even goes on to this day. I don't agree with female pastors, because even in the Bible it says that women should not lead a church. It's in the Bible. It's in several places. I'll leave that up to you. You can hate me for all you want. You can hate me for years on end. I don't care. What the Bible says is that, now, does that mean that there can't be like female leaders within the church? No, that doesn't mean that. They can help with females and the ladies and the girls, and help build their faith. But as pastors, they really cannot, because there is a distinct definition in the Bible in 3 different places that talks about it. And shocking, a lot of people say yes, but really it's not. It's just, and it's not as if that said it's all misogynist and stuff like that. It really isn't. The Bible for 2,000 years has had this locked in. And while there's a lot of churches out there that do have female pastors, if you look at the Methodist Church and see how that worked out for them, because they actually have the most per capita of churches within their system of more, they have more female pastors than they do male pastors. And if you know anything about that issue, I'll tell you to look it up. That's on you.
Places aren't exactly bastions of female liberation, who would have thought? Anyway, these aren't...
Actually, funny enough, Jesus was a big proponent for female liberation in many aspects compared to what the old Pharisaical life for females were. So, slight comment, I just want to give that out to you.
Ordinary preachers standing before small congregations. These are celebrity pastors, individuals who command not just churches, but entire media empires. Consider Joel Osteen again.
Yeah.
He isn't just a preacher, he's a brand. His soft-spoken, motivational style has made him a household name, with his books becoming best.
By the way, he's really not soft-spoken. I've seen some, he's not soft-spoken at all. He's just very charismatic, and that's where a lot of people, it's like President John Kennedy was a very charismatic person. Joel Osteen is a very charismatic person, but charisma doesn't really bring salvation.
Sellers and his TV sermons watched by millions. For his followers, Osteen is so much more than a pastor. He's a symbol of hope and success, someone who exemplifies what they too could achieve if they follow his teachings. Or take T.D. Jakes, whose church, the Potter's House, draws tens of thousands each week. His sermons are fiery and emotionally charged, but they're also spectacles. Like Osteen, Jakes knows how to turn a sermon into an event. His charisma is magnetic, and his words carry weight within his church and broader world of faith and media. But there's a darker undercurrent here. These pastors don't just preach faith, they sell hope. And hope can be dangerous when it's time.
And he's right. Simon's right. Hope is very dangerous to quote unquote sell. I don't sell it. I don't come up with these books. When we have a Bible study, it's straightforward as is. You're going to get it raw. You're going to get it as it is. And for the Bible studies for us, I look for ones that you don't have to pay for, because I'm not going to, in many aspects, the Bible studies are the bread and butter for the actual author than they are then building faith for the person. But Simon's right. Selling hope, that has become the titular identity for the majority of churches now. It's selling hope. I'm not going to sell you anything. All I'm going to say is, have faith and hope. If you donate, that's great. If you don't donate, that's okay too. If you like watching what you see, do the usual YouTube thing, like follow, subscribe, the whole 9 yards. But I'm not going to say, buy this T-shirt because it'll increase your hope. It's not like, put on this armor, it gives you plus defense against this. It doesn't work that way. We sell merchandise. At least we're going to. But I'm not going to tell you, hey, if you buy it, it'll increase your hope. It'll keep you giving. No. The merchandise is what it's for, to help with the operations here at the church. That's all it really is. I'm going to sell it to you straight, because that's what you deserve. You deserve the straightness. As you can see, we have a book by, Stir Yourself Up, Kenneth Copeland, and Glory Copeland. The Copelands are really the big prosperity gospel pastors out there, and I have a problem with prosperity gospel to begin with. But many of these pastors don't get their money from the church sometimes. They sell books. And that's where also in lies the problem. When money becomes the prize, salvation takes the side, it has to take the sides, is off to the side. And that's not what we as pastors are meant to do. We're not here to sell you something. We're to give you what God has said in a condensed, like many of the content creators, news content creators out there. we're to give it to you in a way that you can understand. But if a pastor tells you, hey, do this and you go get to heaven, you got a problem.
To emotional manipulation. For many followers, these pastors become gatekeepers to a better life, promising that faith, especially faith demonstrated by pulling out your wallet and dropping a few notes into the basket each Sunday, will lead to success and blessings. And this takes us back to the prosperity gospel. Followers are told that if they give enough and if their faith is strong enough, God will reward them with wealth, health, and happiness. But when those promised blessings don't come, the blame is often placed on the individual. Maybe they didn't give enough, or maybe...
And yeah, I've been blamed for it. I said, hey, because I really want to ask questions. And I was told by a pastor, it's like, well, you're sinning too much. It's like, well, how do you know? You don't know my life. Yeah, I'm a sinner. Everybody's a sinner. I mean, as a pastor, I'm a sinner. I'm not going to. But when the pastors think they're above sin and think they're, the greatest, and when they sell the prosperity gospel, they'll tell you, as Simon said, well, you're not faithful enough. You're not worshiping enough. You're not into it enough. And that's when people start getting church burnout. And it's what we saw in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s is this whole prosperity gospel. It's not in one small decade. This has been going on for years, and churches thought this was a great idea. Hey, I'm going to tell you, you're going to get health, wealth, and all that, but there are things you have to do. And I'm not saying you have to pray. Part of it is praying, but part of it is you are here active on earth, and you have to do things here on earth to get you to that moment. Health, you can pray to God for the greatest health, but you still have to go to the doctor for your annual checkup to see if your body's listening to your prayers. If the body's not listening to the prayers, guess what? You need a doctor and you need that help. Wealth, okay, you can pray to God, hey, and he may inspire you to get a business idea. You go into business. Again, 90% of businesses fail, but you have to do something active. There takes an active component for you here on earth, and that goes against the whole prosperity gospel in and of itself. And I tell people this, and I've been put down. I've been threatened. I've because how can you say that? It's like God says. It's like the Bible says this, but it doesn't guarantee it. Also, I'm not going to worship a God that is limited to earth. If you understand what I'm saying, my God that I pray to, that I go to, and Jesus on top of that, he's outside the normal sphere of space, time, and all that. Okay? Because if he was in it, he's restricted. If he's outside our ideals of space, time, and place, if he's restricted, that's not a God. That's just a person. I'm sorry to say it like that. But at the same time, once something is outside our standardization of space-time, and I've talked about this in a couple of sermons. I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to make sure this is you get impressed about certain things, is that space and time are limited by us. We're limited by, person, place, or thing. We're limited by time, when, where, those type of things, because we're restricted in 3 dimensions, the 4th dimension being time, because there's 24 hours in a day. God's not restricted by that. But at the same time, it's like the speed of light. You go faster than the speed of light thing, time slows down. That's why I say to people, it's like, if you think about it, there's a 400 year gap between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New. Is because probably God just was like, you know what, you're just not getting it. I need a 5-minute break. And that 5 minutes turned into 400 years. Okay? So I use that as the funny. So let's continue.
Maybe their faith wasn't strong enough. The burden is shifted back onto the believer while the church continues to collect donations. For the pastors, however, the rewards are immediate and tangible. If we want to look at the big daddy, the prosperity gospel milker in chief, if you will, let's have a look at Kenneth Copeland, the founder of Eagle Mountain International Church, Inc., and a strong contender for most plastic surgery on a...
By the way, if you look at the eyes, I don't think that's a pastor. I think that's a demon behind those eyes. But let's continue.
Ever, allegedly. Copeland has been wildly successful as a televangelist pastor to the point that his net worth is somewhere between $300 million and $750 million, depending on the source you want to take. His company, I'm sorry, I meant church, owns 5
it's
aircraft,
a company,
including a Gulfstream 5, which legally cannot be tracked by aviation websites. Probably because they don't want anybody to see that church aircraft are routinely used for vacations. Now let's look at Creflo Dollar and...
Okay, so I don't know much about Creflo Dollar. I don't worry, I have done, but I'm not going to give an opinion on this, but they've done a lot extensive research. I've never seen anything by him, so I can't really give you the whole in depth. But I'll tell you this: if your pastor's riding in a Rolls Royce or Bentley or anything, I'd start searching for another church.
His real name, a well-known prosperity preacher who once asked his congregation to donate $65 million for a private jet.
Yeah.
His reasoning: he needed it to spread the word of God more efficiently. For followers of the prosperity gospel, the request wasn't as outrageous as it seemed, although his plea was later dropped after outrage erupted. Dollar himself, surprisingly, lives in luxury, his mansion and jet being paid for by the faith and the donations of...
Like I said, we can get an allowance. Now, for here at Power Up Church, we have actually in our bylaws that for me at least, and for all pastors that can get an allowance, we have a restricted allowance system. And that allowance is basically, we restrict you to 50% of your mortgage or your rent up to $2,000. But if anything, if your your rent or your mortgage is below that, then it's 50%. But we cap it. And the reason is because we don't want people in mega mansions, as you see here. We don't want that. It's not saying that, hey, you can't have a nice house. But at the same time, you shouldn't have a 50-room mansion like, rappers and, Taylor Swift and all that. You should definitely not have a private jet for yourself, because I'll tell you that is not covered under anything, tax-free or otherwise. There's just nothing there for that. But I will tell you, for us, we're not going to raise rich pastors. We have actually a pay matrix that is strictly adhered to. And it's like the pay matrix you'll see in the U.S. military. This is how it's worked out. And, I interviewed someone and told them about this, and they said, well, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, why not? And they said, well, you're restricting me from growing. I said, how does money restrict you from growing? Well, I'd like to have, a bigger house. And I'm like, and I said, I finally turned around and said, I'd like a solid gold toilet, but even God's not crazy enough to give me one of those. And so we just never had him come and volunteer with us. He had a great attitude until that moment. And all of a sudden, it's like I said, when we start having, when we start being able to pay our staff because we're getting donations and stuff like that, and I showed him all that. I'm like, are you kidding? I mean, he really was offended. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm not here to make pastors rich. I'm here to make pastors be accountable and not have a luxurious 50-room mansion. I'm sorry. We're not the rappers. We're not Taylor Swift. We're not any of that. We're just guys.
His congregation. So, if you follow the money, you'll see just how vast these mega churches have become. Faith isn't just the foundation, it is the product, and the revenue streams are endless. Let's begin with donations. Every Sunday, as the sermon reaches its emotional peak, the offering baskets are passed around, or more often now, digital giving platforms are promoted. Followers are encouraged to give generously, sometimes even beyond their means, because they're told that giving...
Okay. If a church ever tells you, if a pastor ever tells you to give beyond your means, get out of there. I'm going to say it because, first of all, the right thing to do is this. There are going to be people that said you have to give 10%. It's mandatory. It's not mandatory. Okay? And even the Bible, now the Bible says you have to tithe, and tithe means 1/10. But that's the goal. That is not the starting point. And that's where a lot of these pastors, this is where the prosperity gospel really loses out. Is because part of the prosperity gospel is you have to give 10% to the church. You have to give 10% because you'll get 10% back. And there are many people who go into debt for their church. I'm sorry, that's just wrong. People need to live. I mean, even in today's day and age, I've been doing this for several years. I've had to change the name of the church twice because we've had, cease and desists because we're using a name that actually somebody else is using. One of them, we didn't get a cease and desist. The guy just called and said, "Hey, people are confusing me, saying, this is our name." And I'm like, "Oh, you know what? Let me change it." He goes, "No, you don't have to." I said, "No. You've had it long. You've had that name longer than I have. It's yours. Don't worry about it. I can change the name of the church easier than you can name of a major established business." And he's like, "Wow, I thought I was going to get a fight." And I said, "No, you showed me that you've had it longer than I have." And it's great to know that, people come to you and say, "Hey, where's the service?" And he says, "Well, I'm just going to send them to you." I said, "Well, that's all great. But, but again," and this guy was really cool. Nice guy. Love talking to him. I can't remember his name now. But the guy's Nerd Church. He's up in Oregon, I believe. Hopefully they're still in business. But yeah, they had the name before I had, and I used Nerd Church when I started out and started planning. But I've always said to people, because I've had people come in and say, "Hey, how do I need to donate 10%?" I said, "No. If you can donate $5, and let's say that's a good starting point, do it. I'm not going to stop you. Nobody should stop you." But even to give you the best example, Jesus talks to his disciples when an old lady gives a lot. And this is also where, and I've said this before in a previous sermon where we talked about the old lady and the 2 copper coins. She gave more. True, she did. But what people miss is behind it. It's not that she gave 2 coins, which was most of her income. She didn't use it as a display, which many of these Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland will use. Like, "Oh, we got all this money. Yay, that's great." That's the opposite of what Jesus was teaching about the woman with the two copper coins. You don't make a spectacle of it. Yes, God loves a cheerful giver, but a cheerful giver doesn't have to go, "Hey, how is it going? Oh, I'm giving my money. Hey, I'm doing this. Yeah, this is all great." No. And that's what this prosperity Bible was all about. It was about display rather than faith.
Giving is an act of faith, and that faith will be rewarded. But that's only the start. Megachurches have perfected the art of selling merchandise. Walk into one, and you'll likely find a bookstore filled with self-help books written by the pastor, DVDs of past sermons, music albums, and branded clothing, conferences and events.
So here's the thing. Branded clothing, that's one thing. I mean, your favorite creators probably have branded clothing with their stuff. So, or the new trend is coffee or anything like that. Gamer subs, advanced, there's always a component. When I tell people, "Hey, if you want, hey, buy a shirt." Our shirts, you go, "Oh my gosh, they're really expensive," but we only get $5 out of the whole thing. And that $5 goes to our operations. These guys are saying, "Buy our merch, buy it because you'll get to heaven easier." I've heard that one. Or buy our stuff and it'll help you with life. I've read some of these books only because I wanted to get an understanding behind some of these pastors. And it's like, funny enough, many of these pastors are really copying other pastors and then interjecting their own thoughts process. Plagiarism is really rampant in the pastoral community. Don't get me wrong. We all plagiarize everybody, so don't think it's not. But when it comes to the self-help books, I mean, I'm sorry, the self-help books do not help you. Okay, I can honestly say they'll get you a mindset, but you still have to put in the work, which is what these books don't tell you. You can read the books and feel great for about 5-10 minutes. That's really what happens. But real true change in yourself comes from you. You have to want it for the long term, and you have to work for it. And believe me, Satan's going to come after you and say, oh, yeah, right, you can't do this. Or, oh, look at that, you used a self-help book. Oh, my gosh, and how's that working out for you? Faith really is the building and working on not just yourself, but to get to that next level where you can say to the naysayers, I don't need you. I have God. And why does God? Because he loves me. Jesus will protect me from the likes of people like you. But I have to also change. There is work. I mean, even Jesus talks about that. It's not just having faith. You also have to work on you too.
Can bring in even more money with VIP seating and exclusive access costing hundreds or
There are
thousands of dollars.
a lot
These events
of conferences
are
coming out
as
too.
spiritual investments, but primarily
go to them,
fuel the church's bottom line.
That are for
These
ministers,
are
because
incredibly well
sometimes I
that would
see
make
something
Apple
that
and Nike proud.
makes sense.
And I suppose
that it's just
well,
a rare.
good for them because
It's
as long
a
as they
rare
pay their taxes like everybody else.
diamond.
Oh wait, no. There's another problem with megachurches, isn't there? Despite operating like multi-million-dollar corporations, they enjoy tax-exempt status as religious institutions.
In the United States, a church does not have to register with the IRS to get tax exempt. However, they have to conform to a more strict rule set in order to get that exemption without filing the 990s, which is the nonprofit forms that many nonprofits that you see out there are required to if they're registered with the IRS. If you miss even one of these guidelines, you get put on their blacklist, and people can look it up online. I am very proud to say that while we aren't registered with the IRS registered with the IRS, I will tell you that I have talked to many people, especially people who work at the IRS. They have seen what we've done, and they said, no, we can't touch you. And I'm not just saying this to boast. I'm telling you, on average, it costs about $2,500 to register as a nonprofit. Now, does registration help? Yes, it does. But, and many churches, I'll give you this, many churches have failed the test. I'm not going to lie to you. They failed the test because they miss one key point, or in their bylaws they're missing a key point, or in their registration, because we also have to register as a entity, so like a corporation or stuff like that. So we're registered in Wyoming, not because our home state is bad, it's just Wyoming has a great and very restricted rule set when it comes to nonprofits, and we can register as a nonprofit corporation there with that title. But even we have to, we've had to, when we initiated this, we had to prove that we are, because we had to follow even the IRS's strict guidelines. That's when they were able to, give us the nonprofit status for, that we can carry on elsewhere. That's why we chose Wyoming, because they're very restrictive on how they hand those out. Or that, at least when we registered, that at the time, that's how they were.
In the US, churches are classified as non-profits, meaning they don't pay taxes on their income, donations, exact revenues, or sales. For megachurch,
actually, that's not 100% true. Shop sales have to have a sales tax to them, because they have to have a business thing. For us, we use a company that does that for us. So if you see like on if you go to our website and go to our store, it'll have if you live in the United States, it'll have sales tax to it, because the group that we work with handles all of that for us. But when you buy an article of clothing, that still has to have the sales tax. We still for a lot of things, we still have to have a business license. For many things like the coffee shops inside a church, that has to have a component of a business license. There can be other restrictions depending on where you live, what state you're in, even what county you're in, even the cities. So to say that they get 100% is not correct. Now, with the coffee shops, they can register that as a for-profit business with the nonprofit owning it, because that's legal too, and many churches do this. But there is a fine line, no matter what, and for many churches, it's easy to go through this. It's like, hey, we're doing this, but money laundering and tax evasion, I can understand that, because many pastors don't understand that. If I get an income, I have to pay an income tax as a pastor. There's no getting around that. Seriously. Hillsong, as they said, money laundering, all that, it's how the money is done. So, say like, I don't know the whole thing about what happened with Hillsong, but there was a couple of churches out here on the West Coast that got hit with tax evasion, got stripped of their nonprofit status, because what was happening is they were making what they were calling church needs were really not church needs, and they were not paying the taxes on their for-profit system, because they said, oh, it's all being donated. It doesn't work that way. Churches that have a for-profit component, because they do merchandise, they do this and that and all that, they still have to pay tax on those profits, because it's part of that for-profit component. Anything left over when it's donated, that's a whole different matter in itself, and we still have to abide by the tax laws no matter what. So just to say, because just because a church says, hey, they're nonprofit, they'll have different components that are not nonprofit. They'll be for profit, and many of these churches think, oh well, this for profit's owned by the church. That means everything that we get on the profits, because we're giving it back to the church, we don't have to pay taxes on it. Wrong. And I can tell you, I have many friends who are CPAs, they're EAs, and those are enrolling agents. They get EAs are basically people who work directly, who are certified directly from the IRS. So, and I've talked to them about this before I even got into this, because these are things that people don't know, and you need to know.
This tax-exempt status allows them to amass enormous sums of money with very little financial oversight. Meanwhile, the pastors live like royalty: mansions, luxury cars, private jets. These are the trappings of success in the megachurch world. And the message is clear: wealth is a sign of God's blessing. And if the pastor is blessed, well, shouldn't his followers aspire to the same thing? In Chester County, California, the influence of the Bethel Church, a megachurch with more than 11,000 members, has become dangerously intertwined with local politics.
And there's our other problem. So one of the things that we can do as a church, whether we're registered or non-registered, we can say, go out and vote. And that's where we keep it. We can just say, just go out and vote. We can hold voter registration drives, but that's where the line stops. Anything beyond that, saying how to vote, who to vote for, what to vote for, that breaks the rules of being a nonprofit, at least here in the United States. I don't know about other countries. Once, it's one of my favorite lines in Dune. It's like, once politics and religion ride in the same cart, it reaps a whirlwind where nothing survives in its wake. And that's the truth. And Bethel, they have a very, very big political component. And if you remember
Natural
from the
Ministry School wields.
Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to start there. But if you look at what happened in the 80s with the religious right, that's where you started seeing this whole thing. And even as a kid, I wasn't very political, but I'll tell you this. I think the religious right can get really insane. And that's coming from a pastor. So
significant
continue.
economic and political power in the region. Its leaders have openly supported ideologies that are on the extreme, to say the least, while promoting election fraud conspiracy theories and just about anything else going on. In Reading, where Bethel is based, 3 out of 5 city council members attend the church, including the vice mayor. While Bethel has contributed to the local economy by donating to public services like the police, its influence has also raised concerns about conflicts of interest, especially when church members holding government positions vote on proposals directly involving Bethel's expansion.
So that's where I also have a problem. We have several churches out here that have that issue. And there's nothing really you can't bar people from your church. I mean, that's kind of really a bad thing in and of itself. It's a really bad look. At the same time, if a city council is voting on something that would affect a church, doesn't matter who, but a church, and they don't, and that council person who attends that church doesn't recuse themselves, I have a problem with that, because that is a conflict. That is it doesn't conflict with separated church and state. It really doesn't, because if you really read the separation of church and state cause, it basically means that the state does not recognize a formal religion. That's really what it is. But it does get into the conflict of interest side, where there is no what I call the arm's length rule. I have a problem with that. And I've watched many churches out here get really big benefits because they're buddy with a lot of powerful people in the city.
Critics argue that the church has dramatically shifted the political and social landscape of Shasta County. Bethel's theology includes the controversial Seven Mountain Mandate, which encourages Christians to gain control over key cultural and political institutions. Some locals, comfortable with this growing dominance, have created online communities to track businesses affiliated with the church, wary of indirectly supporting it through purchases. And this sort of thing has been happening around the US for some time, often with little to no oversight. In the 1980s, Jerry Falwell, founder of Thomas Road Baptist Church and Liberty University, formed the Moral Majority. This political organization mobilized...
So this is where we have the problem. I like Liberty University. I've looked into them. They've really changed from way back in the day when Jimmy Falwell was really a big power out here. The Moral Majority really became too overbearing, in my opinion. As we like to say, stay in your lane. Well, the Moral Majority didn't. Now, does that say that we shouldn't have a voice? Absolutely not. If you're Christian and you see something wrong, call it out. But you need to understand that in politics, you cannot put religion as the primary. Now, there are senators and representatives at the state, local, and federal level that are very Christian, very God-focused. But the true, in my opinion, the two respectful ones, look at the people, not just to God. They put their faith that they're doing the right thing in God, but they make sure their people are listened to. Okay? And that may go against what God, but they're going to also say, you know what? I've heard this too from some pastors talking about politicians. Some politicians will go, well, God told me. I have a problem with that one too. But when it's like, people say, but I feel that this is what is not correct, because not just because of my faith, but just something doesn't feel right, it would negatively affect. That's fine. But
evangelical Christians to support conservative political causes, particularly Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. Robert Jeffress, pastor of this Texas megachurch, is a vocal supporter of conservative politicians like Donald Trump. Jeffress often blends politics with his sermons, publicly endorsing candidates and influencing his congregation's voting behavior.
And like I said, that's actually a bigger issue because that can actually get your tax uh, your nonprofit status revoked, is when you start getting that political. That's why I tell you, every November I tell people, I don't care who you vote for, just vote. Okay? Just get out and vote. Make your voice count. That's all I say.
Behavior. Though not a traditional megachurch, Capital Ministries is closely tied to the religious right and provides Bible studies to political leaders in Washington, D.C. Leader Ralph Drollinger is said to have significant influence stretching into policy supported by religious conservatives, including discussions on.
And here's the thing, that's not 100% tied together. I will tell you that's a speculation, and he's using pink news, which is an issue, which in and of itself is an issue. But I will tell you this has been going on for centuries. So don't think this is just something new. The problem is that when you don't listen to your constituents, not just your faith, okay? When the constituents and the faith combine, that's a great thing. But when your constituents are saying, hey, but when you say, but I will tell you this, there's something in that, like that piece of legislation that would really negatively affect you. That's why it may be a popular bill, but I can't do it because there's something in there that would negatively affect my constituents. That changes the whole thing. Bible studies have always happened in DC. That's nothing new either. It goes even before the moral majority. So don't think that this is just a new thing or just something out of the blue. There have been Bible studies all the way back to the founding of our nation, that have political leaders involved in them. It's becoming more prevalent out here and becoming news because of how the news is going to shape it, what thinking is going on.
Issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. That's absolutely no surprise that with such wealth and influence, megachurches have often been entangled in scandal. Over the years, many high-profile pastors have faced allegations ranging from financial mismanagement to sexual misconduct, shaking the faith of their followers and exposing the darker side of these religious empires. In the 1980s, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker built the Praise the Lord or PTL Club, a televangelist empire with a Christian theme park called Heritage USA. At the height of their success, PTL raised millions from loyal followers. However, the backers were eventually accused of fraud and financial mismanagement, using donations to fund lavish personal expenses like luxury homes and cars. Jim Bakker also paid hush money to cover up a sexual encounter with the church secretary, leading to his conviction for fraud and
it's not just more than just him. Even Jimmy Swaggart had was accused of having sexual relations with a man, homosexual relations. So, those are the big three. Jimmy Falwell, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, and Jimmy Swaggart. Funny enough, it's always the Jims. I laugh about that, but those are the big three that had the biggest influence on why people really started leaving the church back in the 80s. Is you couldn't trust the pastors. But I will also tell you that these people are human and they have sin. The problem is these guys thought they were above all of that. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? They're above the plebs. They're above all that. And they were raised on these pedestals. So that's no excuse. Don't get me wrong. There is no excuse for that type of behavior. And they should be criminally charged. They should be charged for these things. If that happened to me, you dang right, you're going to come after me. Fine, come after me. If I'm convicted, I'm convicted. But don't put, like when I tell people, don't put me on a pedestal. Don't put me on a pedestal. Don't put any pastor on a pedestal because this is what can happen. And you just lose faith.
A 45-year prison sentence, later reduced to 8 years. PTL quickly collapsed and Heritage USA was foreclosed.
PTL still is around, but it's owned by a different group. But it's now a network and not just an individual thing. And also they've really cleaned up their act in many aspects. So, and because, and funny enough, I'm with a denomination that the Bakers were affiliated with as well. After this happened, as a pastor, I had, you have to take an ethics course. After this happened, and I've read with other, I've seen the history of the courses. This whole thing fully changed the ethics course that I have to take. And I still take an ethics review for myself. I'm not required to, but I take an ethics review. There's a couple of groups out there that have a very strict ethics course that I do every year, and every year I have to renew my credentials. So I usually do that before I put in my credential renewal, only because I want to stay as ethical as possible. Because these scandals not just hurt the pastor, it hurts the people as well. So if you don't have a high ethical standard as a pastor, I think you should just give up. Get rid of your credentials.
More recently, Hillsong Church, the global megachurch that we discussed earlier, has faced its own share of scandals. In 2020, Carl Lentz, the pastor of Hillsong's New York branch, was fired for moral failures after admitting to an extramarital affair. Following
Understand
dismissal,
that. If you ever hear the word moral failure,
including
it's not
accusations
just
of
about
financial misconduct and the covering up of sexual abuse by other church leaders. The scandal widened when Brian Houston, Hillsong's founder, stepped down in 2022 after being accused of covering up his father's sexual abuse. And then there's Creflo Dollar, the prosperity gospel preacher who just had to have that $65 million jet to spread the Lord's word. This demand was met with widespread ridicule from those outside the church, and his image was further damaged in 2012 when he was arrested for allegedly choking and punching his 15-year-old daughter, although the charges were later dropped after he attended anger management classes. Another prominent figure, Ted Haggard, was the founder of New Life Church in Colorado Springs and the National Association of Evangelicals. In 2006, Haggard's career was shattered when a male escort accused him of engaging in drug use and paying for sexual encounters. Haggard initially denied the allegations, but later admitted to some of the claims. The scandal led to his removal from the leadership, and although he attempted a comeback with a new church, his reputation never fully recovered. Bishop Eddie Long, the leader of...
Just to let you know, Jim Bakker's back in the evangelical, but not as powerful as it used to be, just to let you know.
New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Georgia faced accusations of sexual misconduct in 2010. 4 young men alleged that Long used his position of power to coerce them into sexual relationships when they were teenagers. Although Long denied the allegations, the case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, casting a long shadow over his ministry until his death in 2017. And we'll end today with Kenneth Copeland. Kenneth Copeland Ministries, or KCM, has had widespread criticism for luxury spending, tax-exempt status, and controversial stances. It was accused of misusing donations, particularly for a promised aviation relief program in Haiti. Copeland defended his private jets and lavish lifestyle as necessary for ministry work, sparking backlash after he likened commercial flying to going flying with demons. His teachings against vaccination influenced a measles outbreak in 2013.
I'll tell you this, though. I'll still fly commercial if need be. I don't like flying. I mean, I'd rather take the train if I have to, or a boat. But, with what you're seeing on YouTube of people just going nuts, the demon thing, I think I can understand a bit. Jokes aside.
And he insisted on holding a large sermon with hundreds involved during the early days of COVID-19 because religious organizations were exempt from Texas restrictions. Now, megachurches don't just gather crowds, they build loyal followers. The church becomes more than a place of worship, it becomes the center of life. Followers are encouraged to attend multiple weekly services, join small groups, volunteer, and immerse themselves in the church community. The deeper they're involved, the harder it becomes to question the church or its...
Actually, that's not 100% correct. And I'll tell you why. The reason why we encourage small groups is not because just to get you deeper in. There's a lot of churches that have that aspect, like deeper in. Well, they have that. But many of the small groups are Bible study groups hosted by leaders of the church or very high level volunteers, even people out of their homes. That's to build community, number one, because we're losing community out there, as you can see, because we're being ripped apart. It's if the church starts thinking, we're going to have you volunteer so that we can get more of your money. There's a problem with that too, and there are several churches that do that. I'm not going to name them. You know who you are. I'm calling you out for that. But churches rely on volunteerism because that's just been how it is since the founding of the first church. We volunteer our time, our treasure, and stuff like that. If you can't volunteer treasure, volunteer your time. This is why we have places like St. Mary's Food Bank, at least out here in Arizona, where they thrive on volunteers to help distribute the food. It's not that they can't afford it; they already have their own staff that they pay for. But there's an underlying. If you're doing it for money, there's the reward. The reason to do it is just gone. If you volunteer and you help somebody, there's a different aspect. It's actually a mind shift change, and there's been a couple of studies about that where volunteerism, when there's zero reward attached, there's a different reward that the mind will put into place because you're helping somebody. It's like giving $1 to the guy on the street who's homeless. That's the type of thing. You volunteered that money, makes you feel good, but when you're doing it not because pity or I have to, whole different kettle of fish. When you volunteer, there are some groups out there that just can't afford, like many nonprofits who help orphans and all that. Some of them can't handle landscaping and all that. And I used to actually lead a group that did that. We mostly did landscaping. We didn't do a lot of anything else. But because of the work that they did, which was to take girls out of the trafficking system, they didn't want too many outsiders. They relied on churches to have volunteers come in and do the landscaping, do the work, because those volunteers have to be vetted by the church. We have to have you go through a background check. That's required. For a long time it wasn't, but with a lot of the scandals going on with volunteers, we have to. Now, does a background check, no matter how expensive it is, get everything right? No, and we also have seen that. But this is why a lot of these nonprofits will go to churches, is because the stakes are higher for churches when they get it wrong than when they get it right. So volunteering is really a big issue because if you can't give your money, give your time at least. And what you'll see is, as I told people, it's like, look, if you only do it once a month, and that's all I will ever ask of anybody, is just volunteer once a month. Or even better is what I would say, once a month per quarter. So you do it 4 times a year. First of all, I'm not obligating you to do it, number one. Number two, I'm asking you to do it only because, hey, just get out, do it, see what the contribution does. Because in many aspects, you're dealing directly with the person in the group or whatever. You may not think, I'm doing this landscaping, I'm doing that. It doesn't do anything. It does a lot for a lot of these groups. You just don't see it initially, or you don't see it at all, only because many of these groups, like I said, for the child trafficking rescue group that I helped work with, it wasn't about spreading news that, hey, we have all this. It's more of they had to keep quiet because they wanted to protect these girls from the people that they rescued them from. Okay, there is a difference, but I will tell you this: those prosperity churches, they use the idea of community as a way to get you in deeper, so you can spend more money on them than anything else. I will tell you this: if you want to volunteer, I highly recommend you volunteer. Okay, I'm not going to force you, but I do tell you, at least do it once a quarter, 4 times a year. You may not see the initial results. You may not see the long-term results. That's not what it's about. But it gets you out into the community to see what other community groups are doing out there. You may not see them because you're probably busy going on the freeway, commuting to work and back and forth. Sometimes those groups are working in the shadows, and when you volunteer with them through your church or through another nonprofit group, now you see what your contributions can do. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But yeah, I mean, no matter what, even if we get millions of dollars here, we have in our bylaws very strict guidelines. In fact, most of our guidelines came from this very video, because we wanted to make sure they were tight, that people weren't going to be abused by the church. At the same time, we're not going to abuse the system that grants us our nonprofit status either.
Leadership. When a church becomes the focal point of your existence, questioning it or leaving can feel like a betrayal. Those who dare to challenge the church often face social ostracism, and what was once a place of belonging can quickly become a source of isolation for those who don't
been
conform.
there.
It's a form of psychological control.
I've been there. Okay, I helped plant another church that was being planted from another church. Once we as planters went over to help that one pastor plant his new church, that the church that we hived off from, they were nasty. They thought we betrayed them. They thought we were scum of the earth. They were spreading nasty rumors, not just within the church, but publicly. So tribalism is just like in politics, happens in churches. I will tell you this though, Power Up Church and our predecessor churches, we always maintained one thing: is if you're new to Christ, if you're new, we're your starting. We're going to get you started. But if you tell us, hey, you know what, I'm not growing with you anymore, I need to go to another church, our first reaction isn't going to be, well, how dare you? It's going to be, which church is it? How can we get you introduced, and how can we get you plugged in? Because the whole point of a church is to help you grow to a point where now you need another person to help you grow further. If you're not growing in the church that you've been stuck with for 20 years, you got a problem. I'm being serious. So now I do have a problem against church hopping. I really do have a problem with that, because if you're just going to church every Sunday, there's a problem probably, and I'm going to say probably with you, because you're looking for something that doesn't exist. I tell people, look, if you're church hopping, stop church hopping, but find the church that really is more in line with you. You may not like 100% of it, but again, many of us don't like 100% of the movies out there either. Many of us like 90%, 60%, but we like it because maybe it speaks to us in a way, or we just like the music, some stupid thing. But that's the thing about, church hopping. Don't church hop because it doesn't give you 100%. No church is going to give you 100%. Not at all. Go with one that gives you the majority of what you're looking for.
Control that can be incredibly powerful. This control extends far beyond the spiritual realm. Megachurches often influence how their followers think, vote, and live. Pastors can use their pulpits to shape the views of entire communities, pushing specific political and social agendas while discouraging dissent. These megachurches, which claim to offer spiritual salvation, often seem more focused on amassing power and wealth. They create a polished image of hope, prosperity, and success, but they wield control, manipulation, and greed behind the scenes. For millions of followers, the emotional experience of belonging is real, but behind the pulpit, the machinery of megachurches grinds on, driven by their congregations' donations, merchandise sales, and loyalties. When they turn into a business, faith becomes something else entirely. It becomes a tool, one that can be used to control and manipulate. And in the shadow of these massive institutions, we should probably ask, is this really about God, or is it about the men and women who have found a way to profit from the devotion of millions? We'll leave that question over to you.
So, I'm going to tell you right here, in many aspects, that's the major question is, what do we do? I'll tell you this. Donations in churches today, basically, when you give $1, between 60 and 80% of that money is burned internally. On average, and you can look this up, churchstaffing.com, there's many other groups that are out there and many other reporting places that talk about, you can, if you need to use Grok or use ChatGPT to help you out. But on average, 40% of that $1 that you give is burned in just staff salaries. Okay, that's why you see, multi-million dollar pastors. Okay. And then the rest of it is for internal use, like buildings, loans on those buildings. And then the rest goes to the missions. So for that, I'm going to plug Power Up Church on this one, only because it's just what it is. But when you look at Extreme Hub's world aspect of this, if you're on, Kick and all that, I don't know why it's not popping up on the chat there, but when I planted the church here, we started as Nerd Church, then became the Greater Guild. Now we're Power Church, only because we've had people say, hey, we've had this for a long time, we don't want you to use it, use the name. It's like, okay, fine. But I'll tell you this 100% right now, at no point should a church be spending 60 to 80% on itself. Okay, really, it shouldn't. That's the ideal. That's why with us here, and like I said, I'm going to plug us, because this is, like I said, it's written into our bylaws. We actually have a program, and you see it at the bottom here, this link. Money that's donated, that only 10% we're going to use, because that's how we set up that program. We used to have another one where you can go directly to operations, but it's like, you know what, why bother? Because that also violates what we believe. So down below, and yes, I'm plugging it only because I'm just showing you a contrast of what my philosophy is regarding when it comes to church and donations, and how megachurches really should operate, and how church in general should operate compared to what reality is. So as I said, reality, 60 to 80% of all donations are eaten by the church for internal stuff. And then you have the 40 to 20% that go actually out to missions, to actually do what their mission is about. And that's wrong, in my opinion. So for us, when you donate at the link below, only 10% we can use. 90% will actually go to the mission stated on our website. And we have 3 that we will work on, building community centers, creating a disaster response team, and having a college loan repayment program with volunteering aspect. You can see all those. We're working on the wording on 2 of them because they are very sensitive and have some legal ramifications. So you'll see the one with community centers, but you won't see the other 2, because we are really working hard to figure out how we can do it without violating, rules and regulations beyond that. I know it sounds weird, but even as churches, we have to go through that. But in all seriousness, we put it in that because we think, tithe is to the person, but also tithe is for the church as well. We should have a 90-10 program. And that's why Power Up Church has what it has, is because we want 90% of everything to go out there to the communities, to our mission. That is a stated purpose. And 10% goes to our operations. Why is that important? Because there has been a line in the prosperity gospel, and it's used constantly. Even outside of prosperity gospel, many churches still say this when it comes to passing the plate, or put in your digital code or anything like that, is, well, God loves a cheerful giver. And what that really means is basically we don't resent donating our money. Okay, that's really what it is. But the second aspect of it is If God only needs 10%, see what God can do with just 10% of your wealth. Well, okay, great. What about churches abiding by that too? That has been our main goal. So that's why we are an online only church. We don't have a building as of yet. We'd love to have a building, but because we don't have an operating budget for it, except for me going out and doing lift and people not donating, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So we have to be online only for right now. Now, let's say people start donating. Hey, that's great. We can only use by our bylaws and by the program that we have set up. And because we have set it up that way and have public stated, now we're locked into that mindset. We cannot go over that 10% budget that you people donate into. We cannot go beyond that. So let's say, this month we only make $100. Okay, $10 goes to our operations, $90 goes out to, and with $90 we really can't do something. So what we do is we will put it in a savings account so that it can generate interest on top of that, so that there's more money to use later on as we go. But we know what we need for these budgets, and the money is huge. I mean, it is a huge amount, but at the same time, it's like we're not going to go beyond 10% for operations. And the reason is because if God only needs 10%, the church only needs 10%, because everybody else needs that 90%, and that's how it is. So I hope you had a great time with me. I know some of you are chatting here, going, "Oh my gosh, look." I'll tell you this: at no time do I ever want to pressure you into donating. I know I talk about it. Your content creators always go and say, "Hey, donate here, do this," and that's all good, well and good. But for you as a human being, it's really up to you. We're not going to push it, and if you decide to donate, there's a link below. The other thing is that I'll tell you is that the difference between a lot of churches and ourselves is we don't pay for our payment processor, and we don't pay a monthly fee for the people who do handle our donations, but we've had to search for them, and it's because we all, like I said, we believe in having 100% available, where we can split it into that 90-10 dynamic. So when you donate, I will say this: when you donate at the link below, it's going to ask you if you want to donate more. And the reason is because this group relies on donations of people donating to, say, the church or to whatever cause or whatever, to put more money in, so that that money can be used to pay the payment processors. I find that a little bit better, because you may be helping a nonprofit not have to pay, the 3% plus 30 cents that Stripe and PayPal and many other these normalized payment processors pay. The charge for just taking your credit card donation. We use a service that doesn't take any money, and if you don't, that's not a big deal. It's not going to charge us. We get 100% of the donation you put in. So don't think that just because you put in when you donate to us, that we're only going to get a portion of it. No, we get 100% of that. It's on our end where we split it into that 90-10, and we actually have a account set up just to make sure that 90-10 split happens. It's automatic. It's done so that we don't have to do it, manually, and somebody could probably misappropriate funds. We don't want that. The system automatically does it. So other than that, I hope that's a great insight on megachurches, because while many churches aspire to that, what you really need to know is that, yes, churches are businesses. They have to think like that, because unfortunately that's just how the way of the world is. But they don't really have to 100% act like that. They have to manage the money. They have to be good stewards of the money you put into them. But at the end of the day, our calling, as myself as a pastor, for us as a church, is to bring faith and salvation to the people. in a way that they can understand, in the way that you can understand. And that's all that we're here for. And plus to bring a community together and say, hey, want to sit down and chat? Have fun. Because that's really what churches were all about, all the way even back in the early days. So I'm your fleet commander, Brandon. Thank you for joining me today. Next week, we will start our next series. Be there for that, because we're also going to be playing games as well after the message. So I will talk to you guys later.